If you've been around the community for some time, surely you know about an anime by the name of Overlord. If you somehow don't, it's about a guy that was celebrating the final hours of a once popular dive technology MMO, only to find himself not forcibly logged off when its server shut down, and discovering that this is now his reality. For years, I've heard a lot of people discuss the series over various different aspects of it, but there's one topic that constantly gets brought up, and I feel it's one that nearly everyone's wrong about. Morality. Time and time again, throughout these discussions, I always see people labeling Momonga as an evil guy, but through my time of being a fan of the series, I don't agree with that at all. To explain where I'm coming from, I'll begin with Season 1 of the anime, to its most recent season, and detail Momonga's trip into becoming Ains Gon. I promise you there's way more to him than what most people would lead you to believe. With Season 1, Momonga is just a normal person. He's dumped into this world and given a ruling role which he obviously doesn't have a lot of experience with. Much of this part of the series is him trying to learn what it is to be a leader, and it explores the shortcomings and possible failures that happen when he doesn't treat his role seriously. At first, this situation had overwhelmed him, but he quickly adjusted to it through the guise of acting as how he assumed his player character would given these circumstances. This is where a lot of the discussion on the series can be had when it comes to this topic, as a lot of people argue that he becomes increasingly evil for simply having himself exposed to this false persona all of the time. You'll quickly notice that, because of his inexperience as a leader, he ends up accepting certain things that his underlings came to the conclusion of when it comes to how they perceive him, and he just kinda rolls with it. It makes things a lot easier when you can just pick and choose from the thoughts of your closest officials in order to close any gaps that you might not even know how to explain yet. It's why the majority of the season is a completely fake Momonga. Sure, there are some bits of his true self that come out here and there, but everything you see isn't something that he himself would be like. And if you couple that with the fact that he struggles with basic instincts of being an undead race now, you get a pretty nasty combination that makes it look as if he's evil on a surface level. Despite those same undead instincts showing through pretty heavily in this, he still manages to bring out his humanity, albeit a bit strained because of the new changes. Honestly, this season is the last time you see him very blatantly showing his humanity, but there will be a lot of times where it shows through in the more minor interactions he has as he adjusts to the character that he's playing. Rewatching Season 1 just for this video, I found myself amazed at the amount that Ains showed compassion towards the humans. He goes out of his way for them, going as far as to try to get his own subordinates to align with them. In order to have a more trusting relationship, he even lies to his own people just to make them more accepting towards humans, no matter how unreasonable they see those demands. There's also another thing that you'll notice. With how much he protests that he's doing all these things for his own good, it still shines through that he hasn't changed as a person. Even by the end of the season, he's shown that he even grieves for people that he barely knew, and that writing of his character is why he faces the failure that he does at this part of the story. He's a good person, but he's not a good leader, and he finds that out the hard way. It's what leads us into the first major development of his character as he goes through the steps to become a great leader for his people. Through this, we move on to Season 2. This is probably where I've seen a majority of people confirming that Ains is evil, because it seems like he's in the wrong for this arc in the story. From a morality standpoint, this part shows him in a light that's more neutral than anything, as any negative things that Ains has done is counteracted by the reasoning for doing so. It's really hard to say anything in this season was an evil thing to do, even when it comes to gaslighting tribes of lizards so they can get stronger in order to be of use to the growing kingdom. The Lizard Man conflict is the first decently nuanced arc within the series, and while it starts off as a bad action, the intentions behind it are far from evil. It was a test designed to make a divided group come together to benefit everyone involved. You can disagree with it all you like, but it was a good choice to make in Ains' path to becoming a true ruler. Another thing to note was that this arc was also there for Ains to teach his subordinates valuable lessons, as he wants them to develop more as people instead of just blindly listening to his orders. Ironically, while the Lizard Man arc presents such an interesting point of discussion, there's not really much to talk about regarding the morality of Ains, as this season focuses more on the other characters. Outside of the arc, you don't really learn anything new when it comes to that. We just get a rehash of what we already knew, and some things reinforcing that Ains is still very good at the core of his being. They even reiterate that he goes out of his way to avoid killing someone as long as there's nothing to gain from it. The most significant thing that Season 2 really shows you about Ains is how he's adjusted to playing a character. His humanity has gotten harder to discern, but you still very brazenly see it within the actions he takes. He still questions his undead instincts, and because of this, he seems to fight against them even harder as he doesn't want to see himself as heartless. These feelings attack at his reasoning, and it makes him feel conflicted because he still sees himself as human, and he wants to retain that humanity. It's a bit endearing because his wishes seep into his basic mannerisms because of it. In Season 3, Ains learns that his underlings thinks that he wants to dominate the world, and his reaction to that alone is all you really need to know about his morality at this point in the series, as it takes him completely by surprise. It's one of those things that he just kinda reluctantly accepts as to keep his people happy and not look down on him. The funniest thing about Ains is the fact that he's actually a pushover when it comes to his subordinates. He's often found himself in shock from what his people believe he's thinking, but out of some feeling in him, he's unable to turn them down, and it just ends up piling on stuff he really didn't want to do. Honestly, I feel a lot of how people think of Ains is because they're falsely putting the blame on him when it's more of pure incompetence as a leader. By this point in the story, it's still very clear that he's not evil. At the very worst, he's just a leader that's greatly hindered by his own ignorance. With Season 3, instead of learning more about Ains' morality, you learn just to what degree he would go to in order to protect the place that he calls home. While this does have a hand when it comes to the morality of his character, it gives a better idea of just how important Nazarick and the nearby lands really are to him. Another thing to note is that this part of the story gives a better look on the morality of people from this world, which is something that you don't see much of in the earlier bits of the series. From the rotten to the more pure of heart, it adds a nice mix of bittersweet emotions to this season, and it helps overall to show just what kind of a leader Ains really is. By now, you'll also notice a pretty glaring pattern with Ains regarding how he feels about things that just solidifies that he's not evil by any stretch of the imagination. It really confuses me how anyone thinks that he's evil when, if you actually pay attention to the series, it shows the complete opposite. He's not a beacon of righteousness, but he's not some sort of demon from the pits of hell either. Season 4, however, is the most interesting one when it comes to Ains' morality. More of his true self is brought to the surface through his need for coexistence between all humanoid races, and he shows himself to be very idealistic. With the strength he provides, he truly believes that he can bring that to reality, and it offers a new look into him that we haven't seen in the series thus far. You see, at the end of Season 3, Ains went through a short-lived war. It's the only time in the entire series where you can say that anything he's done is evil, but it's also very understandable considering how there's no such thing as a good war. That war, however, deeply affects Ains to the degree that it's very visible during this season. It might not be something that's brought up, but you can tell he's acting differently compared to the previous parts of the story. With more wars, it could be interesting to see how much more it could possibly affect him, though, judging from how things go in this season, I don't think we'll be getting more of that. There's a limit to how much a character can get used to war before it just does nothing to them, so that's for the best. You need to draw a fine line to balance that when writing in order to keep them on the righteous side of things. The events of this season are full of tough decisions for many reasons, but it ultimately confirms some of the suspicions I've had from the beginning of the series. I feel after seeing this much of Overlord, I can explain my views on Ains pretty well now. So, after going through all of that, just what is the conclusion on Ains' character overall? Well, I honestly think he's the most human character there. If you were to put him on an alignment chart, I'd say he's lawful neutral, though despite the few bad things that he's done over the course of the story, I consider him a lot closer to lawful good than anything else. Of course, I only base this from the anime, so for all I know, Ains' morality can be very different in its source material, but I still believe it was very much worth taking a look into him the way I did here. Unfortunately, it's not like we have much of a range to compare him to others within the series. A lot of characters in Overlord are undeniably evil, but the most evil of those characters aren't even the ones that are monsters. A lot of the series wants you to believe that the ones that oppose Nazarick are good, but a closer look shows that you shouldn't trust that. The most evil acts imaginable are very blatantly done by the enemies of Ains' group, and this isn't one of those cases where they're more evil by comparison. Throughout the series, Ains does his absolute best to do good by his own morals. Some actions can be questionable, but they all serve a purpose for something good. He's willing to take up the blame for things, get through dirty work, and even martyr himself, all for the better of humanity in general. He goes so far as to even try to create a place of equality for any intelligent being to even get rid of needless bloodshed. Ains might be idealistic, but he's truly the only person in the series that acts from a pure heart and good intentions. He's questionable and incompetent as a leader, considering he often lets his own people step all over him and acts as though they're conveying what he thinks, but that's a completely different matter for people to discuss. His failure as a leader doesn't have a grasp on who he is as a person, since you can see how he thinks is plain as day. I'm sure someone else out there can have an incredible discussion when it comes to that though. And with that, I'm done here. If you like this video, please consider becoming a part of my community, as I do content in a similar vein to this every now and again. Just remember to watch at least one more of my videos if you decide to do so, since any video you choose might not be what you expect compared to this one. If you wish to follow me in other places that aren't here, you can find links to my Twitter and Discord in the description.